My name is Omar Yusuf Khan. I am an American naval officer, born and raised in the United States, trained in its academies, and sworn to defend its waters. I wear the same uniform as every other officer, salute the same flag, and stand the same watches at sea. But there is one thing that has always set me apart. I am a Muslim. In a world of steel decks, radar screens, and relentless discipline, my faith was my anchor. While others began their days with coffee and briefings, my mornings began before dawn, quietly with prayer. I learned early that in the military, especially in America, faith is something you are expected to keep private. But Islam was not a hobby I could switch off. It was the way I breathed, the way I measured right and wrong, the way I stayed grounded when the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. I did not grow up with privilege. My parents were immigrants who believed in hard work, integrity, and accountability. They taught me that being Muslim meant being honest even when no one was watching, disciplined even when no one demanded it, and humble no matter how high you rose. When I earned my commission, my mother whispered a prayer for protection, and my father said only one thing: remember who you are wherever you go. I remembered. The U.S. Navy is built on precision and hierarchy. Orders are given, orders are followed. Emotions are controlled. Doubt is buried. Weakness is corrected. I excelled in that environment because Islam had already trained me in self-discipline. Fasting taught me restraint. Prayer taught me focus. The Quran taught me patience. Over the years, my record spoke for itself. Promotions came, responsibility grew. Eventually, I was entrusted with command responsibilities aboard a modern warship. Advanced systems, cutting-edge technology, and a crew trained to trust machines, forecasts, and calculations. Out at sea, surrounded by officers from every background and belief, I rarely spoke about religion. Not because I was ashamed, but because I understood the environment. Still, there were moments, small, quiet moments, when someone would notice. A junior officer once asked why I disappeared during lunch on certain days. Another noticed the small prayer mat folded neatly in my locker. A few asked respectful questions. Most said nothing at all. I never preached. I never forced. I believe that faith shows itself through character long before it shows itself through words. Yet, even with discipline, training, and technology, there is a truth every sailor eventually learns. The ocean does not care who you are, but I. It does not recognize rank, nationality, or confidence. One moment it is calm and obedient. The next it reminds you how small you really are. I had spent my entire career trusting systems, navigation charts, satellite data, weather models, command protocols. They were reliable. They were tested. They were the backbone of modern naval power. And still, deep inside, I knew something many never admit out loud. Human control has limits. Islam teaches that power belongs to Allah alone. That lesson is easy to recite on land. It is much harder to internalize when surrounded by technology that makes you feel invincible. Steel hulls, reinforced bulkheads, engines powerful enough to cut through waves. You begin to believe that preparation equals control. That belief was about to be tested. At the time, our mission seemed routine. Patrol, presence, deterrence. The weather forecast was clear. Seas were moderate. Visibility was good. Nothing indicated danger. The bridge was calm, the crew confident, and the ocean deceptively peaceful. I stood on deck that night, feeling the familiar vibration of the ship beneath my boots, listening to the rhythm of the sea. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Too quiet. I offered a silent prayer, not out of fear, but out of habit. I did not know then that this calm was only a pause. I did not know that within hours everything we trusted would fail. And I did not know that the Quran, recited in the middle of chaos, would become the difference between life and death. That night, the ocean was preparing to teach us a lesson no academy ever could. The early hours of the mission unfolded exactly as planned. The ship moved steadily through open water, engines humming with mechanical confidence. On the bridge, screens glowed with clean data. Stable pressure systems, predictable wind patterns, nothing out of the ordinary. The meteorological reports were clear. No storms, no anomalies, just another controlled operation in a long line of successful deployments. Experience teaches you to trust your instruments. Years of training condition you to believe that if the data is clean, the situation is safe. And for a while that belief held firm, but faith, real faith, teaches something different. It teaches that certainty belongs only to Allah, not to charts or algorithms. As the hours passed, I began to notice subtle changes. The air felt heavier. The horizon lost its sharpness. It was nothing dramatic, nothing any system flagged as dangerous. Yet there was a quiet unease, the kind that settles in your chest without explanation. Sailors throughout history have spoken of this feeling, the sense that the sea is holding its breath. I dismissed it at first. Command demands clarity, not intuition. I reminded myself that this was the U.S. Navy, backed by the most advanced forecasting technology on Earth. Still, I found myself stepping away from the consoles for a moment, standing by the bridge window watching the water move in patterns that felt unsettled. Below deck, the crew carried on as usual. Laughter drifted from the mess. Engineers monitored systems with routine efficiency. This was the rhythm of military life. Predictable, controlled, disciplined. No one sensed what was coming. A few hours later, the first warning appeared. Not as an alarm, but as a contradiction. A junior officer pointed out a sudden pressure drop that did not align with the forecast models. Another noticed wind speeds increasing faster than expected. Individually, the readings meant little. Together, they formed a question mark. We ran recalculations, updated feeds, cross-checked satellites, still no official storm. Yet the sea had begun to change its tone. The waves grew sharper, no longer rolling but striking. The ship adjusted automatically, stabilizers compensating, systems responding as designed. But the horizon darkened unnaturally fast. Clouds gathered with a speed that defied logic, stacking upon each other like walls. I ordered heightened readiness, not because protocol demanded it, but because something deeper insisted. Some of the crew exchanged looks. Others trusted the machines more than my caution. I understood them. We are taught to rely on what we can measure, but Islam teaches that what is unseen often carries greater truth than what is visible. As the wind intensified, the first real alarm sounded. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to command attention. Waves rose higher, crashing against the hull with growing force. The deck tilted more than usual, equipment rattled. Conversations stopped. Within minutes, the situation escalated beyond explanation. Wind speeds jumped dramatically, rain lashed the ship sideways, visibility collapsed. Radar returns blurred into chaos. The sea, once manageable, now moved with aggression, as if rejecting our presence. The bridge fell silent, not from fear yet, but from disbelief. "This wasn't predicted," someone muttered. They were right, it wasn't, and that was the problem. I felt the weight of command settle heavily on my shoulders. Responsibility sharpens quickly when certainty disappears. I issued orders, course adjustments, speed changes, damage control checks. The crew responded with professionalism, training taking over as adrenaline surged. But deep inside, another realization surfaced, one I could not ignore. We were entering territory where human planning ends. I whispered a quiet prayer, not aloud, not dramatically, just a sincere call for protection. Not because I had lost confidence in my training, but because I knew its limits. The storm grew faster, stronger, more violent by the minute. This was no ordinary weather shift. This was something else, something overwhelming. And as the ship began to fight for balance against the rising fury of the ocean, I understood a truth that every believer eventually faces. There comes a moment when preparation is no longer enough. A moment when rank means nothing. A moment when technology falls silent. And in that moment, only Allah remains. The sea was no longer testing our skills, it was testing our surrender. By the time the storm revealed its true strength, denial was no longer possible. The ship was no longer moving through the sea, it was fighting against it. Waves slammed into the hull with violent precision, not random, not careless, but relentless, as if the ocean itself had decided to remind us who truly holds power. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Orders were issued and acknowledged. Hands moved quickly over consoles. Voices stayed firm, trained to suppress fear. But beneath the discipline, something had changed. The confidence we carried hours earlier was gone. The wind screamed across the deck, drowning out alarms and voices alike. Rain struck like needles, driven sideways with impossible force. The ship listed sharply, correcting itself again and again, each time slower than before. Bulkheads groaned under stress. Loose equipment crashed violently across compartments. This was no longer a situation you manage. This was a situation you endure. Engineering reported rising structural strain. Pumps struggled to keep up with incoming water. Navigation systems lagged, recalculating endlessly as the sea refused to obey expected patterns. Communication with nearby units degraded rapidly, swallowed by static. I stood at the center of the bridge, gripping the railing, my boots sliding slightly as the deck tilted beneath me. Every decision now carried weight, not just of mission success, but of lives. Dozens of them. Men and women who trusted me not only with orders, but with survival. I had been trained for combat. I had been trained for emergencies. I had not been trained for helplessness. For the first time in my career, I felt the terrifying truth settle in my chest. We might not make it out of this. Fear moved through the crew like an undercurrent. No one panicked, but eyes betrayed what mouths did not say. Some whispered quick prayers in their own way. Others clenched their jaws, focusing on tasks to avoid thinking too far ahead. A few stared silently at the chaos outside the bridge windows. I remembered something my father once told me. There will come a moment when Allah removes every support so you remember who truly sustains you. That moment had arrived. I had always believed in Allah. I prayed, I fasted, I recited Quran, but belief during calm seas is easy. Belief during a storm that threatens to erase you, that is something else entirely. The storm intensified suddenly, as if answering its own command. A massive wave crashed over the bow, flooding forward compartments. The ship lurched violently. Someone was thrown hard against a console. Emergency lights flickered, casting the bridge in an unsettling red glow. "Damage report!" I shouted. Voices responded, strained but steady. Injuries, minor flooding, systems holding for now, but now was slipping away. At that point, every rational option had been exhausted. Course changes no longer mattered. Speed adjustments were meaningless. The sea dictated everything. And that was when something unexpected happened. Not outside, but inside me. A strange calm began to form beneath the pressure. Not relief, not confidence. Surrender. Islam teaches that true tawakkul, true reliance on Allah, comes only when you accept your inability. Not pretend strength, not calculated control, real submission. I realized then that I had spent my life mastering systems, protocols, and authority. I knew how to command men. I knew how to command machines. But none of that mattered here. This storm did not respond to rank. It did not respond to experience. It did not respond to technology. Only the one who created the sea could command it. As another violent impact shook the ship, I closed my eyes briefly. Not in defeat, but in recognition. Recognition that this moment demanded something different. Something deeper than procedure. I did not yet know how that surrender would manifest. I did not yet know what I would say or do. But I knew this with absolute certainty. If we were to survive, it would not be because of us. It would be because Allah chose to protect us. And the moment had come to call upon Him, not silently, not privately, but openly, collectively, and without reservation. The storm had stripped us of every illusion. What remained was a choice. Fear or faith. The moment I made the decision, I felt the weight of it settle over me. This was no longer about command protocols or standard operating procedures. This was about leadership in its rawest form, guiding people when answers no longer exist. I turned from the consoles and faced the bridge crew. Water pooled around our boots. The ship shuddered again, metal screaming under pressure. I raised my voice, not in panic but with clarity. "Everyone, listen to me!" They looked up, surprised. In storms like this, captains usually bark technical orders. What I was about to say was different. "We've done everything we can," I continued. "We've followed every procedure. Now we turn to Allah." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm itself. Some faces showed confusion, some relief, some hesitation. This was an American warship, crewed by people of many beliefs. I knew what this could sound like, but I also knew something deeper. When death stands close, labels fade. Another wave struck, forcing the ship sharply to port. Someone lost their footing and grabbed a rail. The sea showed no mercy. I spoke again, louder this time. "I am not asking anyone to abandon who they are. I am asking you to stand together and listen." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small folded card. Creases worn soft from years of being carried. It held verses from the Quran that my mother had written for me before my first deployment. Words I had read quietly many times. Words I now felt compelled to speak aloud. The bridge grew quiet. Even the storm seemed distant for a moment. I began to recite. Not rushed, not shouted. Steady. Allah is the one who carries you on land and sea. The sound of Quran on the bridge of an American warship felt surreal. Yet something shifted. The noise inside my chest eased. The fear that had been clawing at my thoughts loosened its grip. I continued. Verses of protection, verses of mercy, verses that remind the heart who truly controls creation. The crew stood still. Some closed their eyes, others simply listened. No one interrupted. No one mocked. In that moment, belief was not debated. It was felt. The storm did not stop immediately. Waves still crashed. Wind still howled. But something else began to happen. Something subtle, yet undeniable. The ship's violent movement softened, just slightly. Not enough to celebrate, enough to notice. Engineering reported that pressure levels had stabilized, not improved, but no longer worsening. Pumps began catching up. Alarms quieted one by one. I kept reciting. Not because I expected instant results, but because faith is not a transaction. It is trust. Minutes passed. Each one felt eternal. Then suddenly the wind shifted direction. Rain lost its sharp edge. The waves, once towering and chaotic, began to break differently, less aggressively, less deliberately. Someone whispered, "It's changing." I said nothing. I simply continued. Another few moments, and the bridge windows, once swallowed by darkness, revealed something impossible. Stars, clear, bright, undisturbed. The storm didn't fade. It stopped, as if commanded. The sea flattened. The wind fell silent. The rain vanished. The ship steadied, no longer fighting for balance. No one spoke. We stood there, drenched, exhausted, stunned, surrounded by calm where like chaos had ruled seconds earlier. Finally, a voice broke the silence. How? No one answered, because there was only one answer. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was not technology finally catching up. This was Allah reminding us that the sea obeys Him alone. I lowered the card in my hand. My heart pounded, not with fear now, but awe. The storm had tested our limits. The Quran had reminded us of His. And every soul on that bridge knew we had witnessed something beyond explanation, something that would follow us long after we reached shore. The calm that followed felt unreal, as if the world itself had paused to let us breathe. The ship still bore the marks of the storm. Twisted railings, soaked compartments, bruised bodies. But the sea lay flat and obedient, reflecting the stars like a mirror. For several long seconds, no one moved. We were alive, and none of us fully understood how. Training returned first. Damage control teams deployed. Engineers reported in with steadier voices. Systems rebooted, one by one, as if waking from a nightmare. I listened, acknowledged, and approved, but my attention kept drifting back to the silence outside the bridge windows. It was the kind of quiet that follows a thunderclap, heavy, meaningful, impossible to ignore. I ordered the ship to a safe heading and reduced speed. There was no urgency now, only care. Injuries were treated, flooded compartments were sealed. When the last alarm finally went quiet, the bridge exhaled as a single body. Then the questions began. No one asked them aloud at first. They lived in the eyes, wide, searching, unsettled. A junior officer finally broke the silence. "Sir, I've never seen weather do that." Neither had I. I looked around at the crew. Some stared at the sea, some at me, some at nothing at all. Whatever they believed before that night, it had been interrupted. Not challenged, interrupted. I spoke carefully. "We'll debrief later. Right now, focus on recovery." They nodded, grateful for structure. Structure gives comfort when understanding fails. As the hours passed, the ship regained stability. Daylight arrived gently, revealing the aftermath in full. The ocean was calm, almost peaceful, as if mocking the violence it had unleashed. Debris floated behind us. The horizon stretched clean and blue. If not for the damage reports and our shaken expressions, it would have been easy to believe nothing had happened. But something had happened, and it stayed with us. Later that day, once the ship was secure and the crew had rested, I called a limited meeting. Just senior officers. Not an official briefing. A conversation. I did not begin with explanations. I began with honesty. "What we experienced last night cannot be reduced to data," I said. "You're free to interpret it as you will. But I need you to understand something. When every system failed, when every calculation collapsed, we turned to Allah. And we were answered. No one interrupted. No one argued. One officer leaned forward. Sir, I don't know what to make of it, but I felt something. Calm. Like the fear just stopped. Another nodded. Same. I listened more than I spoke. Leadership is not always about direction. Sometimes it is about allowing space for truth to settle. That night, alone in my quarters, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I sat on the edge of my bunk, replaying every moment, the rise of the storm, the surrender, the recitation, the sudden stillness. I felt no pride, no sense of victory, only humility. Islam teaches that signs are not sent to elevate people, but to remind them. That realization pressed gently against my heart. This was not about me, not about authority or courage. It was about recognition. Recognition that power belongs to Allah alone. Sleep came slowly. When it did, it carried no nightmares, only quiet. The next days were filled with reports and reviews. Weather analysts struggled to explain the anomaly. Forecasts had failed. Satellite data showed inconsistencies that did not fit established models. No conclusion satisfied anyone. Word spread through the ship, not as rumor, but as reflection. Conversations grew softer, deeper. Some crew members began asking questions, not theological debates, but personal ones. About fear, about meaning, about surrender. I answered only what was asked. I never forced belief. Faith forced is faith broken. What mattered was this: the storm had stripped us of arrogance. It had reminded us that certainty is fragile and controls temporary. As we prepared to return to port, I stood once more on deck, watching the sea roll gently beneath the hull. I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for survival alone, but for clarity. We had faced the ocean at its most merciless. We had called upon Allah with nothing left to offer, and we had been shown, unmistakably, that when the heart turns sincerely, mercy follows. Whatever came next, questions, scrutiny, consequences, I knew one thing with certainty. That night would not be forgotten. Returning to port did not bring closure. It brought attention. As the coastline came into view, I could feel the shift aboard the ship. The crew moved with their usual discipline, but something subtle had changed. The storm was behind us, yet its presence lingered. In quieter conversations, in longer pauses before speaking, in the way eyes met and then looked away, thoughtful. Officially, our return was routine. Ships endure storms, crews recover, logs are written. But unofficially, everyone knew this had not been routine. Within hours of docking, inquiries began. Weather analysts requested timelines. Engineering teams asked for sensor data. Command wanted explanations. I provided facts, times, readings, actions taken. I did not dramatize. I did not preach. I simply told the truth as I had witnessed it. Some nodded, satisfied with technical language. Others frowned, unconvinced. A few asked questions that had nothing to do with equipment. One officer pulled me aside after a debrief. Sir, he said quietly, I've been at sea for 15 years. I've never seen a storm behave like that. I met his gaze. Neither have I. That was enough. The days that followed were heavy with scrutiny. Reports circulated. Analysts debated. Forecasting models were reviewed. None offered a conclusion that felt complete. There was always a missing piece, something unaccounted for. On the ship, life resumed its rhythm, but it was a softer rhythm now. Less noise, more reflection. I noticed small changes. A sailor sitting alone on deck at sunset staring at the horizon. Another asking if I ever struggled with fear. A third simply saying, Sir, thank you for staying calm. Calm. That word followed me. It wasn't bravery they had seen. It wasn't certainty. It was something else. Reliance. That night, alone again in my quarters, I opened my worn Quran. The same verses I had recited during the storm felt different now, not urgent, not desperate, but intimate. I read slowly, letting each word settle. Islam does not promise a life without storms. It promises that Allah is present within them. I reflected on leadership. True leadership, I realized, is not about having answers. It is about knowing where to turn when answers fail. The next morning, I addressed the crew. Not formally, not as a lecture. Just a moment of acknowledgement. What we went through tested every one of us, I said. We handled it with professionalism and courage. Whatever you believe, know this. We survived because we stood together when it mattered. I did not mention faith directly. I did not need to. The memory was already doing its work. Still, not everyone was comfortable, and a few officers kept their distance. One questioned whether what I had done was appropriate. Another suggested I had overstepped by bringing personal belief into a crisis. I listened. I accepted criticism. Islam teaches humility before defensiveness. I acted with sincerity, I replied simply. In that moment, I believed turning to Allah was the right thing to do. They had no response to that. Weeks passed. The incident did not disappear. It transformed. It became a reference point, spoken of indirectly, carefully. That night, the storm, when things changed, I could feel consequences approaching, though none had arrived yet. Leadership often means accepting that conviction has a test, but I also felt something else. Peace, not relief, not pride, peace. The kind that comes when actions align with belief, even under pressure. The kind that does not depend on approval. I had not forced anyone to believe, I had not demanded agreement, I had simply turned to Allah when nothing else remained. And that I knew was enough. Because storms do not come to prove our strength. They come to reveal where our trust truly lies. Whatever came next, questions, consequences, misunderstandings, I was ready. Not because I had prepared for them, but because I had learned something far greater than control. I had learned surrender. And in that surrender, I had found steadiness no storm could shake. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, quietly, like a tide creeping in while no one is watching. At first it was subtle. Fewer informal conversations, longer pauses during briefings, a careful distance maintained by some officers who had once been openly relaxed around me. Nothing hostile, just cautious. In institutions built on protocol, anything that cannot be categorized becomes a source of unease. Then the questions became more direct. I was asked, formally, to explain my actions during the storm. Not the technical decisions, that part was already documented, but the moment when I chose to recite Quranic verses aloud on the bridge. The wording was careful, neutral, professional. Do you believe that action influenced the outcome? One official asked. I did not rush my answer. I believe, I said, that when human capacity reaches its limit, turning to Allah is never inappropriate. The room was silent. They noted my response and moved on. No reprimand, no praise, just documentation. In environments like this, silence can be louder than words. Back aboard the ship, the crew felt it too. The storm had united us in fear, but reflection divides people in different ways. Some grew quieter, others grew curious. One evening, a senior petty officer approached me while I was on deck alone. He hesitated before speaking. Sir, I don't share your faith, but I wanted to say when you spoke during the storm, it grounded us. It gave us something solid to hold on to. I nodded. Thank you. Another time, a young sailor asked if Islam teaches that trials have meaning. We talked, not as officer and subordinate, but as two human beings searching for understanding. I did not convince him of anything. I simply explained what I believed. That hardship is not random, that difficulty refines intention, that reliance on Allah brings clarity even when outcomes are uncertain. Slowly, the ship became a place of quieter introspection. Yet not everyone saw it that way. One officer, highly competent, deeply committed to structure, expressed concern. Sir, he said, we have to be careful. Mixing belief with command decisions can be misunderstood. He wasn't wrong. I acknowledged his concern. Leadership is always misunderstood by someone, I replied. The intention matters. But inside I knew the tension was growing. Faith challenges control. It introduces humility where systems prefer certainty. And institutions, especially powerful ones, are uncomfortable with anything that reminds them of limits. I began to sense that the storm had done more than shake the ship. It had unsettled assumptions. Weeks passed. No official action followed. Still, the air remained charged. I remained steady, not defiant, not apologetic. Islam teaches balance, firmness without arrogance, humility without retreat. At night, I returned again and again to the Quran. Verses about patience, about trust, about those who remain upright when pressure builds. I was reminded that prophets, leaders, and ordinary believers throughout history were tested not only by hardship, but by reaction to that hardship. Survival is one thing. Integrity afterward is another. One evening, standing watch beneath a clear sky, I reflected on how easily things could have ended differently, how close we had come to being erased, how fragile certainty truly is. I realized then that the storm had changed me, not by making me stronger, but by making me more aware. Aware that leadership without humility becomes tyranny. Aware that knowledge without faith becomes arrogance. Aware that survival without gratitude becomes emptiness. Whatever lay ahead, scrutiny, misunderstanding, or consequence, I would face it the same way I had faced the storm. With discipline, with honesty, and with trust in Allah not as a last resort, but as the foundation. Because the storm had passed, yes, but its lesson was still unfolding. The real test did not come from the sea. It came afterward, on land, in offices, behind closed doors, where storms are quiet but far more complicated. A formal review was scheduled. Not a court, not an accusation. A clarification, they called it. I was instructed to attend with prepared statements, logs, and witness accounts. Everything was procedural, respectful, and controlled. Yet I understood what it meant. Moments that cannot be quantified make institutions uneasy. I entered the room calmly. Senior officers sat across from me, their expressions neutral, unreadable. Screens displayed charts, timelines, weather models. The storm was dissected into numbers and graphs, reduced to anomalies and probabilities. They asked about my decisions, they asked about command authority, and finally, they asked about the recitation. "Why did you choose that course of action?" one of them asked. I answered truthfully. Because every other option had failed, and because I believe that turning to Allah in moments of helplessness is not irrational, it is honest. Another officer leaned back. "Do you believe that had a measurable effect on the storm?" I paused. I believe that not everything measurable is meaningful, and not everything meaningful is measurable. The room went quiet. They did not challenge me further. They thanked me for my cooperation and ended the session without conclusion. No reprimand, no endorsement, just uncertainty. That uncertainty followed me. Back on the ship, I sensed a shift. My authority remained intact, but something invisible had changed. I was no longer just an officer who had survived a storm. I had become a reminder of limits, of faith, of something beyond procedure. Some avoided the topic altogether. Others seemed drawn to it. One night, a crew member approached me quietly on the deck. "Sir," he said, "I keep thinking about that moment, when everything stopped. I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know that wasn't nothing." I didn't respond with arguments. I didn't quote scripture. I simply said, "Questions are the beginning of sincerity." Islam does not fear questions. It invites reflection. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes. Not dramatic, not public, but real. A sailor asked for a quiet space to sit alone during breaks. Another began waking early, not to pray as I did, but to watch the sunrise in silence. A third admitted he had never considered that control might be an illusion. The storm had planted seeds, not of conversion, but of humility. At the same time, pressure continued to build above me. Career paths shifted subtly. Invitations disappeared. Conversations became shorter. I was not punished, but I was no longer invisible. And strangely, I felt no resentment. Islam teaches that intention matters more than outcome. That sincerity is not rewarded by people, but by Allah. That clarity often comes with cost. I reflected often on the Quranic principle that truth unsettles before it stabilizes. That when hearts are confronted with something real, the first response is discomfort. One evening, alone again, I asked myself a hard question. If faced with the same moment again, would I do anything differently? The answer came without hesitation. No. Not because it had worked, not because it had been witnessed, but because it had been right. Leadership is not about protecting position. It is about protecting lives. Physically, yes, but also morally. In that storm, the most dangerous thing would have been pretending control still existed. Acknowledging dependence on Allah had not weakened us. It had united us. As the mission continued, I accepted that the path ahead might be narrower, that advancement might slow, that misunderstanding might follow me, but I also knew something else. I had crossed a threshold. Once you have seen certainty collapse and faith remain, you cannot unsee it. Once you have witnessed calm where chaos should have prevailed, you cannot pretend it meant nothing. The sea had taught us who we were not, and faith had reminded us who we could be. Whatever awaited beyond the horizon, I was ready. Not because I controlled the future, but because I trusted the one who does. The distance between survival and consequence is often measured in time. What happens immediately feels miraculous. What follows determines meaning. As weeks turned into months, the storm became a reference point, never officially named, rarely discussed openly, but always present. Reports were finalized, findings were filed, the incident was categorized as an extreme and rare weather event. The language was careful, precise, and intentionally incomplete. I accepted that. Institutions move forward by closing files. Human beings do not. On board, the crew continued their duties with professionalism, yet something deeper had settled among us. Fear had given way to awareness, awareness to restraint. Conversations became more thoughtful, jokes less careless, confidence less loud matumaband. No one spoke of the Quran openly, yet its echo remained, quiet, steady, shaping the atmosphere. One afternoon, while inspecting a compartment, I overheard two sailors speaking in low voices. One said, "I used to think control meant strength." The other replied, "Maybe strength is knowing when control isn't yours." They fell silent when they noticed me. I did not correct them. I did not need to. Leadership, I had learned, is not always visible. Still, the external pressure did not vanish. Performance reviews arrived with careful wording. Commendations were delayed. Opportunities shifted. Nothing dramatic, just enough to signal caution. I was no longer an ideal profile, not problematic, just complicated. I understood. Faith complicates certainty. There were moments when doubt tried to enter, quietly, politely. Was it worth it? Had I jeopardized years of work? Could I have handled it differently? In those moments, I returned to the memory, not of the calm afterward, but of the instant before. The chaos, the helplessness, the certainty that nothing human remained to hold on to. I remembered that choice, and doubt retreated. Islam teaches that actions are judged by intention. My intention had not been to display belief or challenge authority. It had been to protect lives when all else failed. That truth steadied me more than any approval could. One evening, nearing the end of our deployment, I stood on deck watching the ocean roll gently beneath the setting sun. The sea looked harmless again, almost inviting. I knew better now. The ocean had not changed. We had. I thought of how easily the storm could have erased us, how thin the line is between presence and absence, how quickly reputations, ranks, and plans dissolve when the elements rise. And I felt gratitude, not for survival alone, but for perspective. A junior officer approached me that evening, hesitant. "Sir," he said, "can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "When you spoke during the storm, were you afraid?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said, "but not of dying." He looked confused. "I was afraid of forgetting who I was when it mattered." He nodded slowly, absorbing the answer. That exchange stayed with me. Fear does not disappear with faith. It is transformed, redirected, placed where it belongs. As we prepared to conclude our mission, I knew my path forward might be quieter, less celebrated, possibly shorter. But I also knew it would be honest. Islam does not promise elevation in the eyes of people. It promises steadiness before Allah. I had not sought to be remembered. I had sought to be sincere. The storm had passed. The consequences had unfolded. What remained was clarity. Clarity that control is temporary. Clarity that humility is strength. Clarity that reliance on Allah is not weakness. It is alignment with reality. As the ship cut through calm waters once more, I whispered a final prayer, not for protection, but for constancy. That when the next storm came, whatever form it took, I would recognize it not as a threat, but as a reminder. Because faith is not proven in calm seas. It is revealed when the horizon disappears. When the mission finally ended and the ship returned fully to routine operations, the world around us looked unchanged. The docks were the same. The procedures were the same. The uniforms, the schedules, the expectations, everything appeared normal. Yet for me, and for many who stood on that bridge during the storm, nothing was truly the same again. I resumed my duties with the same discipline I had always carried. I followed orders. I fulfilled responsibilities. I upheld standards. But inside, a quiet certainty had settled, one that did not demand attention or approval. a certainty rooted not in success or recognition, but in understanding. The storm had stripped life down to its essence. When everything else fell away, rank, preparation, reputation, what remained was a single truth. Human beings are not self-sufficient. No amount of training can command the sea. No technology can guarantee safety. No authority can override destiny. Only Allah controls the unseen. Islam teaches that reminders come in many forms. Sometimes they come gently, through blessings. Sometimes they come violently, through trials. The storm was not a punishment. It was a revelation, a moment in which arrogance was silenced and hearts were forced to remember their origin. I thought often about responsibility. Not just responsibility to command, but responsibility to conscience. That night, turning to the Quran had not been a strategic decision. It had been an act of truth. And truth, once acted upon, reshapes everything that follows. I never claimed to have all the answers. I never claimed certainty beyond faith. What I carried forward from that experience was not pride in survival, but humility in survival. Some paths became quieter after that. Some doors did not open as quickly. Some conversations ended sooner than they once did. But I did not feel loss. I felt alignment. Islam does not teach us to chase approval. It teaches us to stand firm when approval fades. In the months that followed, I noticed something remarkable, not in policy or career, but in myself. Fear no longer ruled my decisions, not because danger had disappeared, but because I had accepted its reality. When you acknowledge that life and death rest with Allah, anxiety loosens its grip. I found myself more patient, more present, less attached to outcomes I could not control. This was not detachment from responsibility. It was freedom from illusion. The Quran speaks of hearts that find rest in the remembrance of Allah. I had recited those words for years. It was only after the storm that I truly understood them. I sometimes think of the crew, each person processing that night in their own way. Some may forget the details, some may explain it differently. Some may never speak of it again. That is their journey. Mine is simple. I know what it felt like when everything failed. I know what it meant to turn sincerely toward Allah, and I know the calm that followed. That knowledge does not require validation. If there is one lesson that remains, it is this. Faith is not proven by what you say when things are stable. It is revealed by where you turn when stability disappears. The sea taught us humility. The storm taught us surrender. The Quran reminded us of mercy. Whatever lies ahead, promotion or pause, recognition or obscurity, I carry that reminder with me, quietly, steadily, unshaken. Because in the end, success is not measured by survival alone, but by who you remember when survival is no longer guaranteed. And I will always remember this. When the horizon vanished, when the storm erased certainty, and when nothing human remained to rely upon, Allah was enough.